shatter the silence. In the heart of the grand ballroom, amid a sea of whispering nobles and flickering chandeliers, Duke Etienne de Rochefort crashes to his knees on the polished marble, his world of eternal darkness exposed in humiliating defeat as his cousin's sabotage unfolds before the aristocracy's merciless gaze. If this raw moment of vulnerability clutches at your soul, subscribe now, because the redemption that follows will redefine what it means to see beyond the veil. Seraphina, her simple gown a stark contrast to the lavish silks around her, emerges from the shadows like a guardian spirit, her posture defiant yet tender, eyes fierce with unspoken devotion. She kneels, her hand finding his in the stunned hush, whispering words that reignite his shattered resolve. Together, they rise, defying convention as the orchestra swells once more. Their dance a rebellion against pity and plot. But this triumph masks deeper perils, the Duke's hidden fears, Seraphina's buried secrets, and a conspiracy that threatens to blind them both to love's true light. The hush that followed their first steps was not empty. It was heavy, laden with disbelief and something sharper: offense. The Palais Royal had been built to glorify power, symmetry, and perfection. A blind duke moving in defiance of expectation, guided by an unremarkable young woman in a plain gown, disrupted the unspoken order of things. Seraphina felt it immediately. The ballroom no longer breathed with her. It watched her. Every step she guided was deliberate. She kept her grip light but certain, her thumb resting just above the pulse in Etienne's wrist, grounding him. She had learned long ago that fear fed on hesitation, so she gave him none. Her movements were precise, her posture immaculate, her chin lifted, not in arrogance, but in refusal. Etienne sensed the shift as well. The murmurs sharpened, the air tightening like a drawn bowstring. Yet beneath the echo of judgment, there was something else, something steadier. Her presence did not waver. She did not rush him. She did not pity him. That more than the fall stunned him. "You do not need to anticipate me," he murmured under his breath, voice low, measured. "I will follow." Seraphina allowed herself the faintest curve of a smile. "Then trust that I will not lead you astray." The orchestra, regaining its courage, leaned into the waltz. Strings rose, fuller now, as if emboldened by the audacity before them. Etienne adjusted his stride, aligning with the cadence, attuning himself not to sound alone but to the subtle language of her body, the way her breath shifted before a turn, the gentle resistance in her fingers before a pivot. With each rotation, something within him loosened. For years he had moved as the world permitted him to move, carefully, cautiously, surrounded by voices that spoke for him, hands that hovered too close, ready to correct, to restrain. Tonight there was none of that. Only her, only motion, only the floor beneath his feet and the music threading through him like a pulse remembered. Across the room, Raoul de Montrevaux watched with narrowed eyes, his lips pressed into a thin line. The stumble had been calculated, timed perfectly between measures, placed at the precise moment when Etienne's escort had withdrawn under the guise of decorum. It should have ended in humiliation, withdrawal, confirmation of weakness. Instead, it had birthed defiance. "Who is she?" Raoul murmured to the woman beside him. "Seraphina Leclerc," came the reply, clipped. "A nobody, distant relation to a ruined provincial line. No dowry worth mention." Raoul's gaze sharpened. Nobodies were dangerous. They had nothing to lose. As the dance progressed, the ton's reaction fractured. Some looked away, offended by the spectacle. Others leaned forward, drawn against their will. A few, very few, felt something stir uncomfortably in their chests, because the truth was unmistakable. The blind Duke was not being led. He was choosing. Etienne felt the eyes on him, the weight of scrutiny pressing in from all sides. Old instincts urged him to retreat, to stillness, to silence. But Seraphina's grip remained steady, her steps sure. She did not slow to accommodate the room's unease. She danced as though the space belonged to them. "You are aware," he said quietly, "that by doing this you make yourself visible." Her answer came without pause. "I have been invisible my entire life, Your Grace. I find I do not fear the light." That admission struck deeper than he expected. They turned. Applause fluttered uncertainly at the edges of the room, quickly stifled, as though no one wished to be the first to approve. Still, it had begun. Cracks in the facade. Permission slowly granted. Yet beneath the surface triumph, danger coiled tighter. Seraphina felt it in the subtle shifts. A courtier slipping away too quickly, a whisper passed behind a fan, the way Raoul's attention never left them. Her own past, carefully buried, meticulously concealed, pressed against the edges of her composure. She had not intended to be seen tonight. She had not intended to matter. But the moment had demanded her. The music swelled toward its final refrain. Etienne lifted his chin, shoulders squared, every movement now infused with certainty. When the last note rang out, silence fell thick, expectant. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Etienne inclined his head toward her. "Thank you," he said, "not for the dance, but for the defiance." Seraphina released his hand, stepping back into herself even as the room exhaled. Applause followed, polite at first, then genuine, then unavoidable. The spell fractured, conversation rushing back in a tide of speculation and recalculation. Servants moved. Nobles smiled too quickly. Alliances adjusted in real time. And somewhere within the noise, a truth settled quietly between them. This night had altered the board. As Etienne stood amid the sound, the echoes of her presence still vivid, he realized something unsettling and profound. He had not seen her face, but he would recognize her anywhere. The night was far from over, and whatever forces had sought to break him had only revealed something far more dangerous. A woman unafraid to stand beside him when the world tried to push him down. And for those who thrived on shadows, that kind of courage was unforgivable. Seraphina Leclerc had not always lived by measuring her steps or softening her voice. There had been a time, distant now, yet etched sharply into memory, when her days were spent beneath Provençal skies, sunlight spilling across wooden desks piled high with books. Her father's study had smelled of ink and dried lavender, its walls lined with volumes in Latin, philosophy, natural sciences, and law. From him, she had inherited not land or fortune, but something far less welcome in a woman without protection: a restless mind. He had taught her to argue, to question, to read between the lines of treaties and texts. He had believed, foolishly, the world would later insist that intellect could shield them from cruelty. Debt proved otherwise. When his ventures collapsed and his heart failed shortly thereafter, Seraphina learned how swiftly admiration curdled into avoidance. Friends vanished. Doors closed. Sympathy thinned. At 19, she buried her father and discovered that knowledge alone could not purchase safety. Now, 6 years later, she walked the dim corridors of Château de Rochefort with a tarnished silver tray balanced in practiced hands, her spine straight despite the quiet panic that lived just beneath her ribs. Each step echoed softly against the stone floors, a reminder that she existed on borrowed grace. Her desires were modest, almost humiliatingly so. A roof that did not leak. Meals she did not have to earn through silence. And, perhaps most dangerous of all, a chance to use her education for something more than survival. To be useful without being invisible. Yet fear stalked her relentlessly. Scandal hovered like a carrion bird over women alone. One misstep, one whispered insinuation, and she would be dismissed, if she were fortunate. The ache of isolation pressed hardest at night, when the château slept and she was reminded how thoroughly alone she was in the world. And beneath it all lay a heart hardened by loss, whispering that attachment was merely another word for ruin. The staff called it the forgotten wing. Even in hushed voices, there was an edge of superstition when they spoke of it. A place where daylight struggled to reach and tempers flared without warning. It was there that Duke Etienne de Rochefort resided, secluded from the life of his own estate like a monarch in exile. Once he had been everywhere. Seraphina remembered hearing his name spoken with admiration in salons and lecture halls alike. A man of biting wit and decisive authority, a favorite in the final glittering years of Napoleon's court. Then came the accident. A hunting mishap, they said. A misfired shot. A shattered world. Blindness had followed. And with it, withdrawal. 2 years had passed since Etienne de Rochefort had last appeared in society. In that time, rumors had flourished unchecked. That madness had taken him, that drink ruled him, that his temper had driven away any servant foolish enough to linger. What was certain was this: his absence had emboldened enemies. His external goal was clear enough even to the lowliest servant. Retain his title, his lands, his authority. But Seraphina, with her scholar's eye, sensed the deeper fracture. Etienne's pride was not merely wounded. It was enraged. He despised dependence. Every offered hand reminded him of what had been stolen. His flaw, unyielding independence, had once made him formidable. Now it isolated him, blinding him far more effectively than the loss of sight ever could. Servants rotated frequently. Relatives visited with thinly veiled concern. His cousin, Raoul, lingered longest of all. Vultures, Seraphina thought. The air in his chambers was stale, thick with neglect and tension. Curtains remained drawn. The scent of untouched food lingered beneath something sharper. Frustration, perhaps. Or grief. She set the tray down deliberately, refusing to rush, refusing to shrink. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady, measured, carrying the calm authority of a woman who had once debated men twice her age. "Neglect serves no one but your adversaries." Silence followed. Then, slowly, his head turned toward the sound. "Who dares?" Etienne demanded. His eyes, pale, unfocused, could not see her, yet they fixed upon her with unnerving precision. His posture was rigid. One hand braced against the arm of his chair as though the world itself were unstable. Seraphina did not step back. "My name is Seraphina Leclerc," she said evenly. "I have been assigned to your service." A humorless laugh escaped him. "Assigned," he repeated, like a sentence. She glanced down, unable to stop her gaze from catching on the chaos around him. Papers littered the desk, solicitors' letters, estate reports, legal petitions. Some bore the seal of Parisian firms. Others were unsigned, corners crumpled in agitation. Her chest tightened. She recognized the patterns immediately. This was not disorder born of apathy, it was siege. "There are letters here," she said carefully, "unread or unanswered. That is not your concern." "With respect," she replied, lifting her chin, It becomes my concern the moment your cousin begins circulating whispers of incompetence. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. How would you know that? Etienne asked quietly. Seraphina met the challenge head-on. Because men who wish to steal power always begin by questioning capability. And because I have seen it before. A beat passed, then another. For the first time, Etienne leaned forward, not in anger but in focus. You speak as though you understand ruin, he said. Her fingers tightened at her sides. I do. Something shifted between them then, subtle, dangerous. Empathy stirred in Seraphina's chest, unwelcome but undeniable. Here was a man toppled not by lack of worth, but by circumstance and pride. A man who, like her, had fallen from grace and found the ground unforgiving. And Etienne, listening to the steady cadence of her voice, sensed something equally unsettling. She did not speak to him as though he were fragile, nor did she speak as though she feared him. That alone set her apart. Leave, he said at last, though the command lacked force. Before you presume further. Seraphina inclined her head, not in submission, but acknowledgement. As you wish, your grace, she said. Then, after a pause that felt deliberate, she added, but adversaries rarely rest, and silence is a luxury neither of us can afford. She turned and walked away, her steps echoing down the corridor. Etienne remained motionless long after she was gone, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. For the first time in 2 years, the darkness felt disturbed, and somewhere deep within his carefully guarded isolation, something dangerous stirred, not hope, but recognition. The door to Etienne's sanctum stood ajar, not flung open in welcome, nor shut in dismissal, but balanced in that deliberate, unsettling way that suggested permission could be revoked at any moment. Light from the corridor cut a narrow blade through the dim chamber, revealing shelves bowed under the weight of neglected volumes and a wide desk scarred by restless hands. The air smelled faintly of dust and old ink, of a room that had once been the seat of power and now lingered in uneasy suspension. Seraphina paused only a heartbeat. Then she stepped inside. Her shoes struck the stone floor with measured clarity, each echo announcing that she would not creep, would not apologize for her presence. She closed the door behind her, not softly, but not with defiance either, simply with intention. I see the petitions, she said. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to argument, to reason sharpened by study rather than status. It was the voice of evenings spent in her father's library, of margins filled with notes and counterpoints, of learning not merely what the law said but how it could be bent, weaponized, or undone. Etienne stiffened instantly. His hands clenched around the carved arms of the chair he occupied, an heirloom piece that resembled a throne more than furniture, as if the very wood had been shaped to remind him of what he still was and what others wished to take. His jaw tightened, and his head turned toward her with sharp precision. You presume much, intruder, he said, the word cutting. That room is not yours to enter, nor are those papers yours to judge. Seraphina did not retreat. Instead, she moved closer, stopping just beyond the desk where scattered parchments lay like fallen soldiers. She could almost feel the tension radiating from him. Anger, yes, but also something more brittle beneath it. Fear carefully armored. I presume nothing, she replied. I read what is left in plain sight, and what is left in plain sight is dangerous. A silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Etienne's breathing was controlled, but uneven. You think you understand what you see. I understand enough, she said quietly. Raoul de Rochefort has been careful. He couches every motion in sympathy. Every letter speaks of concern for your well-being, your capacity, your limitations. She let the word hang, unsoftened. But the pattern is unmistakable. He is not preparing to assist you. He is preparing to replace you. The name landed heavily in the room. Raoul. Etienne's fingers flexed against the chair, knuckles whitening. For weeks, months, he had sensed the encroachment, the subtle tightening of the circle around him. Yet hearing it spoken aloud, named so precisely, sent a shock through him that he could not fully conceal. You speak as though this is already decided, he said, voice lower now, roughened by something close to disbelief. It will be, Seraphina replied. If no one counters the narrative he is building. Another pause, longer this time. Then Etienne did something unexpected. Read them, he said. The command was raw, stripped of arrogance. It was not the order of a duke issuing a decree. It was the request of a man standing at the edge of a precipice. Seraphina inhaled slowly, then gathered the papers. She read aloud, her voice steady as she moved through the language of the petitions. Phrases of concern, implications of incapacity, carefully worded suggestions that stewardship might be temporarily reassigned. Each sentence revealed how sympathy hardened into authority, how protection curdled into seizure. As she read, Etienne's expression shifted. Shock gave way to grim clarity. The truth, once fully illuminated, could no longer be dismissed as paranoia or bitterness. This was strategy, calculated, patient. When she finished, the room felt altered, as though the air itself had thickened with resolve. They mean to strip you quietly, Seraphina said. No duel, no scandal, just ink and silence. Etienne exhaled slowly, his shoulders sinking before straightening again. I built my life on command, he said, and now they believe I can be erased because I no longer see. You are not defeated, Seraphina said at once, the words firm, almost fierce. You are merely unseen. There is a difference. Something stirred between them then. Not a touch, not a glance, but alignment. Intellect meeting intellect. Will recognizing will. The flicker of something that was not yet trust, not yet desire, but dangerously close to both. Etienne extended a hand across the desk. The gesture was tentative, almost hesitant, as though he expected the space between them to swallow it whole. 5 weeks, he said. That is how long until the hearing. Be my guide through these documents, through the courts, through the blindness they think has undone me. If we prevail, you remain. Remain. The word carried weight far beyond employment. Seraphina looked at his outstretched hand. She thought of cold nights spent calculating how long her position would last, of a mind trained for more than carrying trays, of the risk inherent in stepping fully into another's battle. She placed her hand in his. I accept, she said. The contact was brief, proper, and yet it sent a quiet jolt through them both, a recognition that this pact, born of necessity, carried an undercurrent neither could fully name. As Seraphina withdrew and turned toward the door, she reached instinctively for the locket hidden beneath her gown. This familiar weight steadied her. Inside lay her father's final missive, folded until the creases had softened with use. A reminder written in his precise hand. Trust is power, but given without care it shatters. She closed her fingers around it as she stepped back into the corridor, the door clicking softly behind her. Inside the sanctum, Etienne remained still, hand resting where hers had been. Neither of them spoke the truth yet forming between them, that this alliance, forged in shadow and strategy, had already begun to change far more than the fate of a dukedom. Dawn crept into Château de Rochefort not as a blaze of promise, but as a cautious visitor, slipping through cracked shutters and fractured panes as though uncertain of its welcome. Pale light traced the contours of stone walls and dust-laden tapestries, revealing a household suspended between vigilance and decay. Seraphina returned to the forgotten wing with purposeful strides, her mind sharpened by sleepless calculation and resolve tempered by fear. She came not merely as a servant now, nor even as an ally, but as something far more dangerous, a presence that altered the gravity of the space. She carried small, deliberate tools of her own making, a sprig of rosemary tucked into her sleeve, a ribbon knotted with precise spacing, a charcoal map folded thin and memorized, its lines etched not on paper but into her mind. Subtle aids, easily dismissed by an untrained eye, yet invaluable to a man who had learned to navigate the world without sight. Etienne sensed her before she spoke. The cadence of her steps differed from the others, measured, assured, neither hesitant nor obsequious. He stood near the hearth, one hand braced against the mantel, his posture rigid with concentration. He had been attempting, once again, to cross the chamber without assistance. The result lay scattered at his feet. A chair slightly overturned, a book knocked from its shelf, the faint scent of frustration thick in the air. "I told them to move nothing," he snapped, voice tight. "They did not," Seraphina replied calmly. "You misjudged the distance." Silence fell. Then a brittle laugh escaped him. "So the fault is mine." "It always is," she said gently, "when one insists on walking blind without a map." That earned her a sharp tilt of his head, irritation flickering, then subsiding into something quieter. "Wearier." "Again," he said. She did not rush to his side. Instead, she stood several paces away. "Close your eyes," Etienne instructed suddenly. Seraphina hesitated only a fraction before obeying, her lashes lowering as the world dimmed. "Now listen," he continued. "The house speaks. You only hear it when sight stops shouting." At first, there was nothing but her own breath. Then, slowly, the chateau revealed itself. The low groan of beams settling, the distant clatter of silver from the kitchens below, the whisper of curtains stirring in a draught she had never noticed before. "It is a language," Etienne said. "One I learned unwillingly." Her chest tightened. "And one you now teach deliberately." "Yes," he replied, "because if you are to guide me, you must understand what guides me." They practiced for hours. She corrected him with precise words. "2 steps left. The rug ends here. The air cools near the window." He learned the cadence of her voice, the subtle shift in tone that warned him of obstacles. Slowly, painstakingly, the chamber transformed from a battlefield into a map. Growth came not in grand victories, but in small, fragile triumphs. A flawless traversal from hearth to desk. A chair righted without incident. A moment when his hand reached unerringly for the edge of the table, and succeeded. Their hands brushed then, accidentally. The contact was brief, barely more than skin against skin. Yet it sent a current through Seraphina's arm that she felt long after they separated. Etienne stilled, breath catching, not in embarrassment, but awareness. Neither spoke. Outside the sanctum, uncertainty festered. A letter vanished from the desk one afternoon, its absence discovered only when Seraphina reached for it by memory and found nothing but polished wood. Another appeared where none should have been, bearing Raoul's seal, its contents deliberately vague. A warning disguised as courtesy. "There is someone within the staff," Etienne said quietly that evening. Someone who listens too closely. Paranoia crept in, thin and insidious. Every footstep beyond the door sounded louder. Every pause in conversation felt weighted. Red herrings abounded. Glances held too long. Servants suddenly reassigned. Whispers that ceased upon approach. And yet, within the tension, intimacy deepened. The storm came without warning. Thunder rolled across the countryside, heavy and sudden, rattling shutters and drowning the subtle cues Etienne relied upon. Rain lashed against stone, masking echoes, distorting distance. In the sanctum, darkness thickened, not of sight, but of sound. Etienne faltered mid-step. "Wait," he said sharply, uncertainty threading his voice. Seraphina moved instantly, her hands finding his arms, anchoring him. "I'm here." The thunder cracked again, closer now, the vibrations unsettling the very floor. He swallowed, jaw tightening. "I cannot hear the house," he admitted. "Then feel it," she whispered. She guided his hands, one to the edge of the desk, the other to her shoulder. The touch was improper, intimate in a way neither could ignore. His fingers curled reflexively, steadying himself against her warmth. For a moment, they stood like that, breath mingling, the storm raging beyond the walls. "You make me see possibilities," Etienne said softly. The words were unguarded, unpolished. Seraphina's pulse thundered louder than the storm. "Careful," she murmured. "Those are dangerous." He almost smiled. The next morning, the world intruded again. A carriage bearing the Rochefort crest rolled through the gates, its wheels crunching against gravel with ominous finality. Servants whispered. Curtains twitched. Etienne stood at the window, chin lifted, listening to the sound of approaching scrutiny. Raoul had come closer, and as Seraphina joined him, rosemary scenting the air and resolve hardening her spine, they both understood the truth now pressing in. The game had moved to its next, far more perilous phase. Morning light crept into the sanctum with uncharacteristic boldness, illuminating dust motes that danced like quiet witnesses to the intimacy about to unfold. The château was unusually still, as though even the walls had paused to listen. Seraphina stood beside Etienne's chair, the razor trembling ever so slightly in her gloved hand. It was not fear of the blade that unsettled her. It was the significance of the act. Etienne sat upright, shoulders squared in practiced dignity, yet the signs of his retreat were unmistakable. His beard had grown uneven and coarse, no longer the meticulously groomed mark of a duke who once ruled rooms with a glance. It was a shield now, a declaration of withdrawal. "This must be done," he said quietly, not as a command but as a concession. Seraphina inhaled, steadying herself. She set aside her gloves and stepped closer, the scent of soap and rosemary mingling in the air. "If at any point you wish me to stop," she said, voice calm, "you need only say so." "I will not," Etienne replied at once. The certainty in his tone surprised them both. She applied the lather carefully, her fingers precise, respectful. The razor followed, steel whispering against skin. Every movement required trust, absolute, unflinching. He could not see her hands, could not anticipate the angle, could only believe that she would not harm him. And she would not. The room narrowed to the sound of breath and blade, to the subtle tension beneath his skin as he resisted the instinct to flinch. Seraphina felt the weight of the moment settle into her bones. This was not grooming. This was surrender. "You are very steady," Etienne murmured. She smiled faintly. "I was taught that a trembling hand reveals more than fear." It reveals doubt. And do you doubt? He asked. Her pause was almost imperceptible. Not in this moment. His throat worked as she continued. Then, unexpectedly, his hand lifted. May I? He asked quietly. She froze, then nodded. His fingertips brushed her cheek with careful reverence, tracing not possession but curiosity. The curve of her cheek, the line of her brow, the warmth beneath her skin. Your hands are warm, he said softly. I know it should not matter, but it does. Seraphina's breath caught, her pulse quickening despite her discipline. You notice more than you admit. I notice everything, he replied. I simply no longer pretend it is effortless. The razor completed its path. She stepped back, reaching for a cloth. When the knock came, sharp, precise, too deliberate, a servant entered briefly, pale and stiff, placing a folded note on the desk before retreating without explanation. The air shifted immediately, tension snapping taut. Etienne straightened. Read it. Seraphina unfolded the paper. Her heart sank. The letter was brief, calculated, written in Raoul's hand. Curious how conveniently the young woman arrived. One wonders who truly placed her within your walls. The room felt suddenly colder. Seraphina lifted her gaze slowly. It implies. I know what it implies, Etienne said, his voice dangerously controlled. Silence pressed in, thick with doubt. The intimacy of moments before recoiled into uncertainty. Every shared step, every late-night strategy session, every careful touch now stood exposed under suspicion's glare. You were sent, he said. No, she replied immediately. I was desperate. You expect me to believe coincidence? I expect you to believe choice, she said fiercely. Mine. He rose abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, she thought he would retreat, armor reassembling, walls slamming shut. Instead, he reached for her. He pulled her close, not in dominance, but in urgency, as though the truth could be felt if not yet understood. His breath brushed her cheek, unsteady, conflicted. Who are you truly? He demanded, not harshly, but as a man afraid of losing the one certainty he had allowed himself. Her hands came to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. Someone who chose you, she said. Not your title, not your power. You. The space between them collapsed. The kiss was brief, hesitant, charged, almost accidental. A collision of doubt and desire, of fear and need. It shattered the last illusion of distance between them. Then they pulled apart. The letter still lay on the desk, unanswered, unforgiving. Etienne stepped back, jaw tight, emotions warring behind his composed exterior. Trust, he said slowly, once broken, does not mend easily. I know, Seraphina replied, her voice steady despite the ache blooming in her chest. That is why I never give it lightly. The morning light shifted, shadows lengthening once more. What had been forged in quiet intimacy now teetered on the edge of fracture. Passion entwined with suspicion, alliance strained by the poison of doubt. The question lingered between them, unanswered and dangerous. Would trust survive revelation? Speech balloon, would you trust after such an unveiling? Share your thoughts in the comments. The Breton wind tore across the coastline like a living thing, rattling the shutters of Château de Rochefort and carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth from distant cliffs. Inside, The weight of impossibility pressed down upon Seraphina and Etienne like the storm outside, each gust a reminder that their carefully constructed alliance was frail, exposed to forces far larger than themselves. It began subtly, a ripple in their rhythm that soon became a tidal wave. Raoul had orchestrated a dinner ambush, the kind of gathering meant to expose weakness with subtle cruelty. Candlelight flickered across gilt mirrors and polished silver, reflecting the polished facades of nobles eager for intrigue. Etienne moved with care, guided by Seraphina's whispering cues, each tap on a shoulder, each nuanced gesture a silent language they had honed over weeks. But perfection is fleeting. A misstep. His foot caught the hem of a silk carpet. A hand lingered too long on hers, betraying reliance he could neither deny nor conceal. Raoul's laugh rippled like venom across the polished room. "How fitting, cousin," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "To rely on a commoner." The words hit harder than any blow. Etienne stiffened, jaw tight, eyes flashing with shame. Pride and vulnerability collided violently, leaving him trembling beneath the social scrutiny that had once been his armor. Despair did not wait for subtlety. It arrived with a royal invitation, inscribed in gilt lettering and perfumed with ceremonial expectation. The gala, the pinnacle of high society's judgment, demanded Etienne's presence. "I cannot," he whispered in the dim corridors, voice low with exhaustion, despair bleeding into each syllable. I will be mocked, reduced to a spectacle." Seraphina placed a steadying hand on his arm. Her eyes, resolute and unflinching, met his. "We must," she said. Her voice carried both command and comfort, a tether in a world that threatened to tear them apart. Reluctantly, he consented, yet the storm within the château mirrored the storm outside. Isolation became their companion. In his private chambers, Etienne paced like a caged wolf, muttering accusations, self-recriminations, and, finally, lashings at the one person closest to him. You think I need your pity?" he roared, voice cracking. "Do you imagine I cannot survive this without your meddling?" Seraphina flinched at the words, but did not retreat. She had learned that storms of this sort were inevitable. The trick was to survive them with dignity intact. Yet when he turned away, chest heaving, leaving only silence behind, she wept in solitude. Her fingers clutched the locket at her throat, the hidden heirloom containing her father's final, damning words. Inside, the secret burned. Her father's ruin, engineered, in part, by Raoul's distant kin, threatened to unravel everything. It was a tether to the past that could either save or destroy them, and she had no safe way to reveal it without risking both trust and strategy. Night deepened, bringing with it an argument more tempestuous than the storm outside. Words flung like daggers, accusations and fears clashing in the dark. "You never see me," Etienne thundered, voice shaking. "All you see is what you wish to save." "I see more than you know," Seraphina countered, voice low and steady even as tears pricked her lashes. "I see the man who refuses to ask for help, who punishes himself for being human, for being wounded." He fell silent, but not at peace. The silence was heavier than the clash of voices, pressing upon them both with merciless weight. Outside, rain pounded the roof like artillery. The château's walls groaned under the storm, mirroring the unsteady ground of their alliance. Etienne's pride and Seraphina's resolve were now equally imperiled. The hearing loomed where the dukedom could be questioned, stripped, or stolen, and the gala promised public exposure of every weakness, every misstep. The night pressed on. Etienne stood at the window, shoulders hunched, staring into the black beyond, while Seraphina sat at the edge of a faintly warmed hearth, the locket clutched so tightly it left an imprint on her palm. The room was a crucible of fear, desire, frustration, and unspoken longing, each emotion gnawing at their carefully constructed barriers. In that darkness, the reality crystallized. The darkest hour was not the storm outside. It was the one they carried within themselves. Pride, fear, betrayal, and hope all coalesced into a single, suffocating weight. And yet, despite the chaos, a spark remained, a fragile, trembling ember of alliance. One word, one act, one decision could ignite it into something unstoppable, or smother it entirely. For now they were fractured, vulnerable, tested beyond endurance. But the storm had not yet claimed them. The hearing would come, the gala would come, and when they arrived, neither would be the same. The château held its breath, the wind outside echoing the tension within. Two figures, bound by circumstance, ambition, and a quiet, dangerous affection, waited for the moment that could either destroy them or finally set them free. The library at Château de Rochefort had long been a sanctuary of shadow and scent. Worn leather bindings, the faint musk of candle wax, and the delicate tang of ink from forgotten letters. Now, under the veil of midnight, it became a stage for something far more fragile and urgent: rebirth. Seraphina moved among the rows of towering shelves, her fingers trailing lightly over spines as if drawing courage from the knowledge held within. Etienne sat in his chair, hands resting on the carved arms like anchors to a world that felt uncertain. His posture was still rigid, but beneath the surface, something had shifted. An awareness, a fragile acknowledgement of vulnerability he could no longer deny. "Dance with me in the dark," she said softly, her voice carrying both challenge and invitation. Not a jest, not a plea, an assertion that called forth the courage buried under layers of pride and doubt. Etienne blinked, startled. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to contract. Then, as if recognizing the truth in her words, he extended his hand. The touch was tentative at first, a question in physical form, then firm, seeking assurance in a union beyond sight. They moved among the shadows, guided by instinct rather than illumination. Her breath, shallow at first with apprehension, became the rhythm he learned to trust. Each step, a silent promise. Each turn, an acknowledgement of shared struggle. Etienne's fingers lingered along her waist and arm, memorizing the lines of her body, the cadence of her movements. Without sight, he perceived more than ever before. "I've been blind to more than light," he confessed, voice low, trembling with honesty. "Blind to possibility, to connection, to what I've been denying myself." Her gaze softened, and in that darkness, understanding blossomed. She guided him closer, her hands steadying his, their foreheads nearly touching, breaths mingling in quiet harmony. This was not merely a dance. It was a ceremony of trust, a reclaiming of agency, a declaration that the fractures of the past could be mended through presence and commitment. Time slipped unnoticed. The storm that had raged outside in earlier nights faded to a soft patter against the stone walls. Their surroundings blurred. In the sanctuary of shadow and intimacy, courage unfurled within them both. Etienne's grip no longer carried tension, only certainty. Seraphina's confidence, once measured and reserved, now radiated like warmth from a hearth. And then the decision. The gala loomed, a societal gauntlet where Raoul's machinations would seek exposure and humiliation. Etienne's instinct screamed avoidance. Pride, fear, and old wounds tempted him to retreat. But the spark of trust ignited in the library. The unspoken understanding that they were stronger together demanded action. "We must attend," Seraphina whispered, pressing her palm to his chest. The heartbeat beneath her hand was steady now, a pulse of courage mirrored in her own. He nodded, slowly, decisively. "Together," he said, the word carrying the weight of a vow. Not merely to survive the night, but to face the world as allies, as equals, and, perhaps, as something deeper. The embrace that followed was not showy nor performative. It was a fortress against doubt, a shield against fear, and a promise of unwavering alliance. Etienne's cheek rested against hers for a moment, inhaling the scent of rosemary and candle smoke. Seraphina's fingers tangled in the sleeve of his coat, anchoring him to reality, to her, to the possibility that light could be found even in darkness. In that quiet, they both recognized that the world outside might conspire against them, that Raoul's schemes would not rest, and that scandal could erupt at any moment. Yet within the walls of the library, amid the spines of countless histories, they discovered a new narrative, one of courage, choice, and unbreakable partnership. Hope rekindled not in grand gestures or proclamations, but in the subtle, irrevocable decision to move forward together. The gala, with all its pomp and peril, would not find them fractured. It would find them united. Etienne finally pulled back slightly, studying her face with an intensity that belied words. "You've changed the rules of my world," he said, "and I cannot imagine facing it without you." Seraphina's lips curved into a faint smile. "Nor I without you," she replied, her voice a whisper meant only for him. The first light of dawn brushed through a high window, softening the shadows that had cloaked the library. They lingered in each other's presence, fortified by trust, their hearts braced for the trials to come. It was the turning point, the moment when despair gave way to hope, when isolation surrendered to alliance, when vulnerability became courage. The gala awaited, but they were ready, together. The Palais Royal shimmered under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, each prism of light reflecting the whispered scheming of nobles who thrived on scandal as one might on wine. Velvet drapes framed towering windows, through which the first hints of evening gold filtered, casting long shadows across marble floors polished to a mirror sheen. The air was thick with perfume, cigar smoke, and the electric hum of anticipation. Everyone present sensed the unspoken challenge looming in the gilded hall. Etienne de Rochefort stepped forward, every movement measured, every eye in the room seeking a flaw, a tremor, a sign of weakness. His cloak swept across the floor with deliberate authority, masking the tremor in his chest. Beside him, Seraphina's presence was a quiet anchor, her gloved hand brushing his arm, a subtle signal that they were united. The crowd's murmur swelled as the guests, unaware of the intimate strategy playing out, leaned into the unfolding spectacle. Raoul de Rochefort, the Vicomte with ambition sharper than any blade, had timed his sabotage with precision. The first twist came almost immediately. A tripped foot beneath the dinner table sent him sprawling, his mask of civility shattered as silverware clattered around him. A gasp rippled through the assembly. It was not enough to secure victory, but it signaled the opening that Etienne had been waiting for. Seraphina moved like a shadow among the glittering gowns, her steps swift and confident. She reached him at the exact moment his balance faltered, pulling him into the first dance of the evening. Not a frivolous waltz, but a carefully orchestrated maneuver. Their movements were seamless, each turn and sway carrying a subtle message: trust, unity, and unwavering focus. Meanwhile, the subplots that had threatened to unravel their world converged. Etienne, guided by Seraphina, produced letters carefully hidden within his coat, documents proving Raoul's hand in the forged petitions and misappropriated accounts. Gasps spread through the room as nobles recognized the duplicity that had been concealed under layers of etiquette and whispered rumors. Raoul's eyes widened in disbelief, his carefully constructed veneer cracking. He tried to regain composure, but the tide had turned. Etienne's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "You dare question my honor, my sight, and my name? The evidence stands before you. Your schemes exposed for all to see." The assembly shifted, shock giving way to outrage. Guards stepped forward, their hands firm on Raoul's shoulders, and the Vicomte's protests dissolved into helpless cries. His plot, once thought infallible, unraveled entirely in the light of truth. Through it all, Seraphina and Etienne remained entwined in the dance, their steps a mirror of triumph and relief. Each turn, each sweep across the floor, was a declaration, not of defiance against society alone, but of a union forged in secrecy, struggle, and unwavering trust. When the final note of the orchestra swelled and faded, the hall erupted in applause. Etienne lifted Seraphina into a final, sweeping turn, their faces close enough that her hair brushed against his cheek. He whispered, his voice resonant with unmasked emotion, "We have endured together." Seraphina smiled, her eyes shimmering with the glow of victory and affection. "Together?" she echoed, the word a vow that encompassed more than survival. It encompassed love, alliance, and the reclamation of dignity. In that moment, the world outside, the whispers, the ambitions, the shadows of doubt, ceased to matter. They had rewritten their story. The applause was no longer just for justice done or schemes thwarted. It was for the undeniable chemistry, courage, and devotion that radiated from the pair standing proud in the center of the hall. Etienne lifted Seraphina's hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with reverence and adoration, a public acknowledgement of their private triumphs. The murmurs among the nobles shifted to admiration, some awe, some envy, but all recognized the unassailable partnership that had turned the tide. As the gala continued, they moved together through the throng, each glance, each touch reinforcing the pact made in the shadows, solidified through trials, and now celebrated openly. Where once they had been fractured by suspicion, fear, and scandal, they now moved as one, unbroken, unyielding, and undeniably in love. The evening's triumph resonated far beyond the glittering walls. Raoul's ambitions lay in ruins, Etienne's honor restored, and Seraphina's courage immortalized in whispers and admiration. And for the first time, Etienne allowed himself to envision a future untainted by fear, where vulnerability was not weakness, and where love could flourish without apology. In the final moments of the night, as the orchestra played a gentle, lilting refrain, Etienne and Seraphina shared a quiet, lingering embrace on the ballroom floor. Their victory was not only in the exposure of treachery but in the reclamation of trust, the awakening of hearts, and the promise of a life lived together, undaunted by scandal, strengthened by trials, and illuminated by love. The Palais Royal had witnessed schemes and betrayals, but it had also witnessed the birth of something far more enduring. A love declared openly, a bond forged through fire, and a triumph that resonated long after the final curtain fell. The morning sun rose gently over Château de Rochefort, brushing its stone turrets with gold and painting the gardens with soft, hopeful light. The air, once thick with tension, scandal, and whispered schemes, now carried a serene clarity. The halls, previously echoing with the uncertainty of plotted betrayals, now hummed with purpose and laughter. Staff moved with renewed confidence, their loyalty affirmed by the triumphs of the night before, their whispers no longer shaded by fear but admiration for the pair who had faced ruin and emerged victorious. Etienne de Rochefort walked through the restored estate with a quiet dignity, his cloak swinging lightly over the polished floors. He observed the orderly bustle of servants arranging flowers, overseeing kitchens, and tending the grounds, small, ordinary acts that once might have been overlooked, but now each reflected the harmony restored within his household. Each familiar face held a subtle gratitude, the unspoken acknowledgement of the courage that Seraphina and he had displayed against schemes that threatened both their names and the integrity of the dukedom. Yet even amid the calm, Etienne's mind wandered to Seraphina, her presence a constant, luminous force that had reshaped his once stern life. Her past, once a web of hardship and misunderstanding, had been clarified and purified, thanks to both her tenacity and the exposure of Raoul's treachery. But he, in a moment of misguided protection, had sent her away from the chateau before sunrise, believing distance might shield her from any lingering shadows of gossip or danger. He found himself restless, pacing the familiar halls, listening for the smallest sounds, the clop of hooves on the gravel, the chime of the chapel bell, the soft rustle of skirts in the corridors. And then, amid the stillness, the sound came. The steady beat of horse hooves on the driveway, matching the rhythm of his anxious heart. Etienne mounted swiftly, riding through the mist-laden estate as the bells guided him, each toll echoing like a promise of reunion. At the edge of the orchard, where dawn glimmered through the budding branches, he found her. Seraphina, standing with a shawl around her shoulders, eyes glistening as though they had absorbed every tear, every fear of the past days. He dismounted with urgency, striding toward her with the unrelenting determination of a man who had faced his deepest vulnerability and refused to let go. "Seraphina," he breathed, voice rough yet tender, catching her gaze with intensity. She took a tentative step forward, her own pulse quickened, heart brimming with relief and unspoken longing. "Etienne?" Her voice trembled with the weight of everything unspoken. The nights of secrecy, the perils faced together, the tender touches hidden in shadows. He fell to one knee, the rising sun gilding his profile in a halo of hope. "Marry me," he said, voice resonant with all the gravity and passion of a man reborn. Not as a protector and ward, not as master and servant, but as equals, partners in all that is to come. Tears gathered in Seraphina's eyes, and she nodded, breathless, laughter and relief blending into a single exhale. "Yes," she whispered. Her acceptance was more than a word. It was a sealing of triumph, a testament to trust, courage, and the love that had been forged in darkness and trial. The weeks that followed were a tapestry of quiet joy and gentle reclamation. The staff celebrated alongside them, a household united, the chateau's halls alive with laughter and music once more. The gardens bloomed earlier than usual that spring, as if nature itself acknowledged the restored harmony. Etienne and Seraphina took their first evening walk together as husband and wife along the estate's winding paths, hands intertwined, fingers brushing in familiarity and newfound affection. The soft clink of distant chapel bells reminded them that life continued, and while the scars of past trials remained, they no longer dictated the contours of their days. In quiet moments by the hearth, they reflected on what had been lost and what had been found. Courage unearthed, love awakened, trust reforged. Seraphina's intellect and insight guided Etienne, as much as his unwavering resolve steadied her, creating a balance neither had thought possible before. They had been tested by scandal, betrayal, and fear, but in emerging together, they had redefined what it meant to see and to be seen. The château's windows glimmered with the last rays of the sun, catching on the crystal panes and casting prismatic light across their entwined hands. In that light, Etienne's blindness seemed almost irrelevant, for he had learned to perceive Seraphina and the world through the clarity of trust, love, and shared purpose. And so, in the sanctuary of dawn, amid laughter, restored dignity, and the promise of a future full of hope, they stood united. Their hearts, once tentative and wary, now beat in quiet symphony, resilient against all that had come before. Theirs was a love born in trials, tempered in adversity, and perfected in trust. A love that would endure beyond scandal, beyond fear, and into every new dawn. How did this tale of thawed hearts resonate with you? Could courage and trust transform the impossible in your own life? Comment below and subscribe for more epic journeys into hidden depths, forbidden alliances, and love that conquers all.